All right, good afternoon, everyone, and many thanks to Mauro and Fabio and to Bibi and to all of you for inviting me and setting this up and arranging for me to be able to be with all of you. Mauro had asked me to give some reflections on systemic family therapy field, and I will, from my narrow perspective, hopefully with humility, my perspective from the United States, and would love to hear in time how it compares with your views of systemic family therapy in your many contexts. As part of the focus of this conference, as you've been through it today, as you know, it's been on manuals and creativity. And I just want to maybe recall for all of us that activity that Gregory Bateson would sometimes do when he would ask participants to take a look at their hand and to say how many fingers did they have. And, the answer most people would give is, I have 5 fingers. And he would say, well, probably the correct answer is that was the wrong question, Gregory. The more correct question is how many relationships? And there's actually 4. And how do the different fingers move with each other in terms of the hand? And that genetically, there's probably not a word for fingers, or for 5 even. And I bring this up in part because manual, as you know better than I do, comes from the Latin manus and has to do with hand. And I want us to think about how we use our hands in a metaphoric sense. I think that, as you know, any paradigm and epistemology that we have, we are using it because we think it helps us explain the world more effectively and more meaningfully than another one. In that sense, we have a better handle on what we're existing in. And while the systemic and the family therapy field had emerged in the 1950s, perhaps, the systemic paradigm really had been around for thousands of years in many indigenous cultures, and really lost dominance to as we know, to more of a reductionistic paradigm at different points in history, and most recently during the Enlightenment. But what really, I feel like the strengths of it that we've experienced in this most recent iteration is that it really helped us see that things were related, that things were interconnected, and that we could know more by focusing on the interconnections, on those relationships, than by separating them out. The great, I think, improvement in terms of our field that it provided us was, in a sense, it placed us a little bit in that allegory of the cave of Plato, where we could step back and see that what we were assuming were shadows, in reality were actually shadows of ourselves lit from behind, and allowed us the perspective to get behind and to see that, and then to identify that maybe what we're looking at was just a small arc of the larger context, of the larger pattern, and that would lead us often to making certain judgments that were not helpful, and that led to more either more thinking, more blaming, more pathologically focused treatment and work, putting ourselves as therapists outside the family system in a sense, even though we knew we were part of it, but placing us more in a position of wanting to be in control and trying to do something to fix it. The systemic paradigm actually helped us, I think, begin to take that step back. And while that was helpful, I think it's been really hard to maintain. Because the systemic field has also been susceptible to reductionism at various points. At the beginning, often we're so focused only on the family unit, And then, there would be a period of time when something new would emerge, a new focus. I remember during that time in narrative therapy, people would focus more on the narrative issues, and even Sal Minuchin would write, like, what happened to the family? Where did it go? Because we sort of lost it. And we would jump, I think, often too much in a reductionistic way to over-focusing on one aspect within the field, rather than keeping that broader sense of connection and interconnectedness. It led then to the branding of models, to allegiances, almost like to allegiance to a football club and to cult personalities. And we lost that sense of how did we actually evolve? I think that Carmen Sacco in our recent book brings up the issue. We've all evolved, and we never talk about that anymore. In conferences and stuff, we only present the work, but we never really talk about where did we come from? Where did we move to? Why did we change a perspective? Many people in the field early on were trained in psychoanalysis. They would move on to maybe this other more systemic paradigm, but within that, there would be questions of why am I moving in this direction to emphasize this part of my work or that part of my work? And there would often be maybe sense of pride about not wanting to talk about how we were integrating approaches, or maybe some kind of shame of like where we came from. And that's really been something I think that's held us back. It's kept us from looking at the natural coevolution of the way thought happens, the way that practice occurs. And I think that's been a real challenge and has led then to not a very living sense of what a systemic viewpoint is. In the United States, I think it's led to eclecticism rather than integration, that it returns family therapy to a modality and not a methodology. That's one of the things that people consider when they think about, I'll do some individual work. I'll maybe even think about the family individually, but that I will only involve the family at certain points in time, or maybe not at all, and include medications. It's become much more this buffet or smorgasbord way of thinking systemically, and not the integrated way that I think we all intend to, and at our very best, are able to develop. And in that way, we've also become, I think, at times too mechanistic. This, as you know, enraged Gregory Bateson, who thought, how do people in this field think that we can count double binds, or that we can tinker with a certain subsystem and be able to make change? And we also then suffer a bit, I think, from either moving to the very large, holistic way of thinking about our field and research, and saying, well, there's so many complex variables and it's too hard to really get a good handle on whether change is happening or what change is. And so we really can't do effective research, or that we drop down to focusing only on certain research that is looking at particular populations, particular diagnoses within a small group of people, and therefore we say we can't generalize. We've not yet really grappled enough. I think Peter's work and everybody that's working with SCORE is one way of really trying to grapple with those issues in research, but we really have not found, I think, a way to hold both the large complexity of the work we do and actually do some of the more qualitative and quantitative work of examining what we're doing that's effective and isn't effective in our caring of patients and families. I think for me, my own evolution is a case in point. I was trained simultaneously by Minuchin, Haley, Montalvo, and Carl Whitaker. They were all presenting the same integrated model in a sense. They didn't call it integrated. It didn't seem integrated to me. You can look back on it and think about how did these different people work together. But I think there's also this natural sense of we learn from the people that we first enter into the field with, and then it becomes part of who we are. We gravitate towards certain approaches. And that was something that we then named. I worked with Howard Little, and we talked about it, structural strategic. But it really was a process of taking what we were learning, looking at it closely through observation and research, taking into consideration the needs and the feedback from the people that we're caring for, and then changing and shifting in the very moments of the sessions as well as the larger model. And this is a process that I think that more people are beginning to talk about and articulate. I think it's in our recent book. If you look at many of the chapters, people talk about that movement and evolution. Again, for me, a big turning point was when I began working and training physicians to think systemically and to do family therapy in their clinical medical practices. This was a program started by Carlos Linsky 50 years ago. I began 40 years ago, and for the last several decades I've been doing this work. But that became key in that many of the family therapy models that were out there were developed on populations, middle, upper class, white populations that didn't really match the communities that we were serving. These communities were economically poor or marginalized historically. A lot of U.S.-born people who had faced a lot of discrimination and racism, a lot of immigrants. There were 22 different languages spoken in our clinic. The families had gone through considerable amounts of intergenerational trauma. None of the family therapy models really kind of answered the needs that they were presenting to us. It also coincided with my own diagnosis of 2 cancers when I was 33, and that shaped who I was as a healer. And then there was a clear, important focus of Basin's last book, his posthumously published book, Angel's Fear, which was Epistemology of the Sacred, which occurred in 1987. And it was during all of those experiences for me that I began to realize how the systemic model could be expanded much more deeply and much more meaningfully, rather than it being simply something that was focused on helping a particular system function differently. And in Basin's epistemology, I think the biggest emphasis shift that he makes, and I think it's there in his work all along, but he so clearly talks about that there's a meta pattern in this cosmos, that we are all connected, but we're also interdependent. And that's a key difference. It's not just that we're parts of a machine that have interconnections, but that we are interdependent on each other, and therefore, in a sense, we are responsible to one another. And we are part of this larger system that expands beyond human interactions, that includes all the context. We are part of the context in which we are trying to help in a very deep way. And it has to be then a way of looking at a world that's ordered, that has a great deal of disorder, that has a great deal of chaos. For our physicians, this was an important step epistemologically to help them, because in their clinical practice, in a half a day, they may meet with someone. Their first patient may be someone who they say, you have end-stage liver cancer, and I'm sorry, the time that you thought you would have in this life is going to be very different. And their next visit may be a well child check with a young baby. And then their next visit may be with a couple where there's some problems within their marriage, and the one of them has a very severe diagnosis. And yet another one may be a prenatal visit in which they're helping a young family get ready for the birth of a child. And so this movement very fast within a clinical situation where you're dealing with some of the very hard tragedies of life and the very happy moments, physicians, and I think to a large degree ourselves as well as therapists, need some kind of way to understand the complexity of this world that we live in, that we are part of this, that it isn't always something that we can fix. We don't have the control. We want to be able to alleviate suffering. We want to be able to help, and yet that's not always possible in the ways that we and our patients want. And when we see ourselves as a part of this, when we see ourselves as part of this large forest of trees and roots that are connected underground, and communication and the air and the dirt, and we're part of the compost. When we see ourselves as part of that, then we don't see ourselves in some way as different from the families in which we care for. We see our own woundedness, we see our own resilience, but there's no other. So therefore we can't fall into the sense of looking at somebody as different from ourselves, so different that it allows ourselves to be oppressive, allows ourselves to be discriminatory, to be racist, to be homophobic, to be sexist, in any way to set somebody apart from us, to say that we are not the same. We are not tied together. We are not dependent on each other. And we ethically have the responsibility to care for one another. This then leads to a model which emphasizes then the mutuality of our work together, which is increasing, I think, a sense of how to collaboratively involve patients and families in the research that we do, but that we really are trying to create a context together in which there's a respect for mutual expertise, where we're trying to find out what it is that we think, is my epistemology, how I'm thinking about it, intending it, and acting with you in the room. How are each of you thinking about the way that we're working? What are you intending to do? How does it become enacted in the room? And how does that enactment together, that epistemological enactment, that is the creativity, that is the work of therapy. Where can we show that we're trying to do something and yet we're not achieving the results we want when we have a communication with each other as a therapist or as a family member? And within those differences, the differences that make a difference, where the creativity can occur. And the importance of trying to explicate that, of putting our intent out there, and then realizing the impact so people can challenge us, can understand us. So this model of work for me feels like it's more expansive, because it requires us to be grounded in a way that we are in the right orientation towards the sacred. We are no longer the center of the universe, but we are part of something much larger than ourselves that we are participating in, and that we can hold together and work together to try and improve things. And I would like to venture that one of the places for family therapy, systemic therapy to move is beyond the walls of the clinic room. That's an important place for us to work, but a paradigm about how to understand the world, can it also help us understand the world that we're living in now? The most recent movement of systemic therapy occurred in the 1950s, which was after the post-war, after the World War II, after the atomic bomb, the advent of television and technology. We are in a similar inflection point that requires even a greater expansion of our way of thinking. As you know, we're again facing with climate change and with seemingly unending wars and new nuclear threats and considerable political divisions, and a great deal of otherness in which we see ourselves potentially as other than the people who we share this planet with. So I wonder, do we have the ability in our, both in our exam rooms, but also outside in our communities, how to take the things that we know from our systemic work and wed it with our sense of justice to be able to begin to affect the larger world, the larger issues. Basically, once I heard him say that you don't change paradigms, you're born into it. And the new generation, I hope most of you that are there or this new generation of systems thinkers, you were born into this new world where there are all of these challenges going on, and with information rapidly changing, with AI, with technology, with the rapidity of something happening, you understand entanglement in a different way when something happens halfway across the globe, and instantly it goes viral on the other half of the globe. That can we take some of the things that we know, the sense of interdependence, the sense of mutuality, our deep sense of listening, of trying to understand people before we make any moves to try and intervene, how we bring people together, how do we bring people together with respect and dignity, how to have them work together, work with differences towards a common goal. And can we do that in some of these larger spheres to help with the survival of humanity and of life? So that's the place that I would encourage us to think. In addition to not that we just think about only our work within the clinic exam room, but also the whole larger context. And do we have something to offer? And I think this larger epistemology provides us with that. It provides us with a sense of awe, of wonder, of mystery, of not being in control, of trusting one another, of being with one another. And I just want to end with one thing, and going back to hands. And since we're all online, you can maybe participate if you want or not. You could hold up your hand and look at the other people's hands in front of you. And the meditation that I've heard about and have wanted to kind of build on is to look at our hands and look at each other's. And to really contemplate where, before we were born, where did everything that makes up this hand exist? The molecules, the atoms, the carbon, all of this came from somewhere and became part of what we now have as a hand. And as we look at each other, so did theirs. And when each of us pass from this world, these hands will also disappear back into the larger cosmos. Each of those parts of it will go back to it. And it's what we have in this moment together that joins us, it joins our hands together, where we can hold on to something sacred, where we can continue to work together, not with pride, not with evangelism, but with deep humility and respect. Bateson said that he thought the best metaphor for approaching the sacred was that of love. And I think, if anything, our field, our movement of systemic thinking and relational work has been love in action. And I look forward to all of us continuing on that way. So I thank you very much for your time and love you all.